All right, for more on what's at stake here, we've got Phil Gurski standing by. Phil is a former analyst with CSIS, Canada's intelligence agency. He is joining us from the Capitol today. Phil, always good to have you on CTV. What do you make of the story and some of the main security concerns?
Well, it's really interesting what's happening, and I'm not surprised the Chinese are reacting in the way they are, but I don't see this as a lot of a sideshow. I mean, we've been talking about Huawei for an awful long time in this country, but talking about Huawei as a potential threat to national security in terms of our new 5G network, and whether or not having a foreign company, a foreign Chinese company, controlling our infrastructure is a good idea. All of a sudden, we have this arrest on fraud charges that seem to be linked to something to do with Iran. And my first reaction is, wow, where did that come from? It has nothing to do with the conversation we've been having, but it's certainly having a very deleterious effect on Canada-China relations, both politically and economically.
Yeah, how do you see that playing out now, the implications on that relationship?
Not good. We've already seen, the stock market just taking a hit. We have allegations that, or some evidence that Canadian firms are suffering. Canada Goose, for example, which had hoped to make inroads in the Chinese market, has, been affected. It's a matter of time before other things are affected. The BC government canceled a forestry delegation to China to discuss trade issues. And, obviously they canceled it due to what's been happening in the courtroom. So it looks like more of this is going to happen. I think we'll suffer more than China will in terms of our bilateral economic relationship.
Phil, I mentioned at the beginning, your area of expertise, is working with Canadian intelligence. So let me ask you this. I mean, the Americans, the Australians, the New Zealanders have all said thanks but no thanks when it comes to Huawei, that it is a threat to national security. There is more and more pressure being put on Canada to get on board, so to speak. Is Huawei a threat?
Well, I'm not a technology expert, but I'll simply go with what two of my former directors, Mr. Elcock and Mr. Fadden, have said categorically. They think Huawei does represent a threat in terms of having access to Canadian communications and Canadian data. So I think, absolutely, I don't think we want our telecommunications backbone to be in the hands of a foreign company, especially when that foreign company happens to be China. I think there are real concerns about this. And as you said, most of the other Five Eyes partners, the Anglophone intelligence partners, have already said they want nothing to do with this. So it almost seems a bit odd that Canada's been a bit of an outlier so far. Bit of an inconsistent message from the government.
The allegations, of course, is that what is going on are, the close ties between the Chinese government and Huawei and the Chinese military and Huawei, and that its infrastructure, its technology could be used to spy on governments and companies and people living in the West as well. The Chinese, Phil, continue to say that is preposterous, it is unproven, it is not true as well. Is it a question of these countries, Canada and its close allies in the Anglosphere, basically saying, look, we can't take the risk?
I think so. I don't know how much evidence is out there, but as you say, when you have a company that's so closely tied to both the Chinese government and the Communist Party of China, let's face it, that's not a normal government. It's not like a Western government. And so the implications or the fears are that the government can leverage Huawei to collect intelligence on its behalf in ways that we can't do here in the West. So the fears are very real and the concerns are real. And that's why intelligence agencies are saying, you know what, maybe not a great idea.
We were talking to one of our tech analysts here on the program, Phil, last hour, who had a different perspective. And he said, what this is really about is primarily the Americans trying to shut down a Chinese champion. This company is obviously a competitor to Apple and others. And therefore, by pushing back here and blocking it from coming into the U.S. and parts of Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, this is a way to make sure that Huawei doesn't get too big.
I don't doubt there's some of that happening. But at the same time, the Australians have had a similar position. The New Zealanders have had a position. Other countries, Western European countries, have similar positions. So then it's not just the Americans doing this. Even if they're trying to leverage their own technology and their own firms, which, let's face it, that's what Donald Trump wants to do, right? Make America great again. But I think the concerns are legitimate, and it's not just the Americans behind this. So we got to tread very carefully going forward in this.
Phil Gurski, a former analyst with Canadian intelligence at CSIS. Good to have you on, Phil. As always, give us your take on this fast-moving story. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd.